Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 9x90. Today, we have an absolutely amazing guest with us. We have the Dave Donison of the Weizmann Institute with us today. He is the CEO of the American Committee for the Weizmann Institute of Science, one of the world's top multidisciplinary research institutions. Under Dave's leadership, the committee has significantly expanded its outreach and helped raise record-breaking philanthropic support for Weizmann's pioneering work in cancer, neuroscience, AI, climate, space, and more. On June 15th, the Institute suffered devastating ballistic missile strikes that damaged or destroyed 5 major buildings and more than 50 labs, disrupting years, if not decades, of groundbreaking research. As the Weizmann Institute launches a global recovery effort and prepares to build a transformative new medical campus, Dave joins us to share how visionary donors who want to be part of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity can secure their names in history by helping rebuild and redefine science for the future of humanity. Dave, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure being here, Eddie.
So, could you give us a brief history for those who are new to Weizmann?
I'd love to. We were founded in 1934 by someone who was a scientist who went on to become the first president of the state of Israel, named Chaim Weizmann. He himself was a chemist. He had over 110 patents, but he had a deep conviction that building the state of Israel would require a knowledge economy, and we'd have to have our best and our brightest really tackling the biggest problems and create the new data and knowledge sets for the future. What's interesting about Weizmann's history and what we actually are is part of the story of Chaim Weizmann is also the story of the state of Israel. And what do I mean by that? In 1915, the British were going to war in World War I, and they had a problem. They needed to create cordite, which is smokeless powder, and that was being produced by the Germans, and that was now their enemy. The British had a national contest to look for someone who could come up with an alternative method of creating acetone synthetically. And the reason they did that was the Admiralty had done a study in which they would have had to take down every tree in the United Kingdom to create enough of this acetone for their war effort. So lo and behold, they came to this Russian Jewish lecturer at the University of Manchester named Chaim Weizmann, who in short order showed them how to do it. And you could scale it up in gin and scotch distilleries, thus saving the British war effort for their navy and their cannons. But the reason that was so important was when the higher political echelon in the UK went to Chaim Weizmann and said, how do we repay you for saving us and for this monumental contribution to the UK? He said, please support my people's right to a homeland. That's all he asked for in return. And that became 2 years later, the Foreign Secretary issued what's called the Balfour Declaration, and that was Lord Balfour, and that was done in appreciation for Chaim Weizmann's efforts. And so our institution since 1934 has been based upon being an oasis of science. We only do natural and precise science, so it's biology and chemistry and physics and math. And essentially, we have 275 principal investigators somewhere between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv in a town called Rehovot. What's unique about our environment is that we have about 2/3 of our faculty and their families live on campus, so it's kind of like a commune with world-class science. On top of that, we don't hire anyone because they're a member of a certain discipline. And what I mean by that is if a biologist retires, we go into the marketplace and just look for the smartest, highest horsepower human being. And they might be in computer science or physics, and we hire that person. We give them all the infrastructure, the housing. Our campus has gyms and restaurants and nurseries and everything that you need not to divorce yourself from your family life from your scientific life. And then there's one other secret key. This is the secret sauce that Chaim Weizmann wanted. We have no scientific, let's say, mission besides doing the greatest science. So scientists can do whatever they want. The president of the institute doesn't tell any academic what to study. If they want to study the most amazing bird in the Amazon and be the best at it, they can do that. If they want to study cancer, they can do that. And it's really up to the scientists themselves. And I would say that those are the things that make up the institute. And I would just end by saying that the Weizmann Institute is widely known in the scientific community as the only top 10 research institute outside of the United States in terms of its impact and the citations by other institutions. And last but not least, we're only a graduate school, so we don't have any undergraduates. It's scientists with master's students, doctoral students, and postdoctorates.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So you briefly touched upon it, and I think we should dive into it a little bit more right now. You focus on curiosity-driven research. What does that mean in practice, and why is it critical to the scientific breakthroughs that you have coming out of Weizmann Institute that are shaping the future?
Yeah, I think the most interesting way of thinking about curiosity-driven science, as opposed to something more applied, would be we're interested in answering fundamental questions. Kind of the questions that maybe when we were children we would ask. Why is the world work this way? What are we all made out of? What's the relationship between time and space if you're a really precocious kid? But we're really...
Yeah, I have a three-year-old.
Yeah.
What is concrete
So do
made
I.
of? Why is it ground into gravel? How does that process work? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's if everyone's focused on how to make the best app or how to make a computer slightly faster or a material that's slightly stronger and has better longevity, the kind of research we have tends to start from a place of, I wonder why this happens in the universe. And the reason why this is important is a lot of these fundamental questions get into an understanding of the universe that we just don't know. I'll give you some examples of things that have happened from the accidents of just the observation of fundamental science. So what are some of the biggest things in the world that even in applied research would be antibiotics? And the story of antibiotics and penicillin is one of my favorites. And somebody's looking at infections on stains, goes away for the weekend, notices there's some mold growing on it, and lo and behold, it's discovered that certain molds can fight blood infections in human beings and systemic infections, and created probably one of the most major revolutions of the 20th century. You have other things like, this is amazing to think about. Somebody in the early 20th century is asking, okay, with atoms and molecules, do they spin in a certain direction? They go left, they go right. No idea of any application of that. It turns out they spin, by the way, Adi. Fast forward, it took some really, really smart scientists and engineers that by the mid 20th century created MRI machines, which can now use the spin to visualize the systems of our body. And it's really one of the main diagnostic tools. That's what curiosity-driven science is about. We like to say that it's about doing revolutionary science. We're swinging for home runs, not for space hits, which would be more evolutionary science. And so Weizmann's a place that we want bold creativity. We use the word chutzpah a lot, which for people who don't know what that means, it's Yiddish for nerve, but it's really just having the moxie to try and fail. And our scientists really have a culture of trying and failing and trying again.
Yeah, I have a degree in medicinal biological chemistry. My final thesis.
Perfect.
Yeah, yes. So I understand a lot of what you're saying. We will not dive way too deep into the science for those of you who are not in that realm, but my final for my final research project, I proved that there was a non-invasive cure for coronary artery disease. But amazing. Yeah, my professor was like, you do realize that a lot of open heart surgeons will hate you. But I was 23 and all I wanted to do was figure out how to get the calcium out of my dad's veins. Like when you're young, you don't understand, how like the economic implications of science and scientific breakthroughs. So this
I could talk with you about the FDA all day long, Eddie. That's another whole other episode. I think part of what curiosity-driven science is, we have this strategy of no one is told what to study. They just let their own curiosity drive them. And these are very driven people who want to change the world. And naturally they cluster around questions. And this strategy since 1934 of letting our scientists just work together collaboratively on whatever they want, has actually created 8 blockbuster drugs, more than any other institution in the world that I'm aware of. Because actually we have 8 drugs that have had annual sales of over $1 billion, most of which have been kind of clustered in 3 areas: specific kinds of cancer, multiple sclerosis, and then certain immune diseases like plaque psoriasis, Crohn's disease, some of those larger biologics, the ones that they advertise on television in the United States all the time.
They came from you.
Parts of them came from us. Yep.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. Okay, so what are some of the most impactful discoveries or contributions from Weizmann scientists that have changed the world? You just brushed upon three buckets. Do you want to dive deeper into that?
Yeah, what I'll try to do, Eddie, is because we're not just biomedicine and we're not just cancer, I'll try to jump around and kind of let people get a full picture of what we're touching. So in cancer, we're best known for probably 2 or 3 things. Besides the drugs, we were the first place in the world to show that you could successfully transplant bone marrow between 2 genetically incompatible people, which is really important for treating leukemia and lymphoma around the world. We also pioneered CAR T cell therapy, which uses your own immune system to destroy cancer. And that led to the first FDA-approved gene therapy for cancer, and that's used in leukemia. And then we have a non-invasive MRI technique called 3TP, which detects cancer without surgery. And that works, it is approved by the FDA for breast and prostate cancer. So it changes how early how early you can catch tumors.
Wow.
That would just be in biomedicine. So in other technology, back in the early 1950s, it was in 1954, we created one of the first computers in the world, but it was certainly the first computer in the Middle East called Weizmann, which really was able to answer and ask some fundamental questions that our scientists have all the way back then. And then in 2022, we built Israel's first quantum computer, WISE-QC, and that's one of 30 in the world. Every time we're using our banking or trading information online, we use the encryption algorithms. One of the most famous ones we co-developed with MIT called the RSA algorithm. And one other area that we're really excited about is in 2020, we started a partnership with the United Arab Emirates-based Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence. And together, we're jumping into some really deep applications for healthcare, genomics, and other domains. We've developed in food, wheat that's protein enriched, so it has 40% greater yield for farming. In Africa, there's a parasitic weed called witchweed that affects 100 million farmers. And we've come up with a novel method to stop that. It's also environmentally safe. We've also come up with a chemical-free way to treat polluted water that just breaks down pollutants into oxygen and carbon. I mentioned the drugs. I don't know when you were pregnant, but when my wife, I have a 3-year-old also, she had amniocentesis. That's the genetic tests of the amniotic fluid to actually find out the actual genetics of your fetus. We pioneered that. We're the first place in the world to do that. That's still being offered for people who want gene counseling around the world. Very important. We have another area of fertility treatment that we can do a biopsy on a woman, and we can double her IVF fertility outcomes if we'd use this biopsy beforehand. And then also just in the physical world, we were involved in the discovery of the Higgs boson at CERN in Switzerland. And also we're participating with NASA and the European Space Agency to launch Israel's first space telescope called Ultrasat that's going to give us real-time photographs, pictures of supernovas, black holes, and other transient cosmic events. And so that's just a small smattering of the stuff I think we're involved with, but the list goes on because they're quite busy at the Weizmann Institute.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Wow. Okay, from your perspective, what is Weizmann's role in driving progress for humanity at large in the decades ahead? You kind of already started to brush upon this.
Yeah, I think I'll make an observation that's not particularly wise. I just think it's pretty apparent to all of us that whatever large human problems we have are going to have some scientific or technological breakthrough that it's going to make it a lot easier for the solving of these problems. I'll give you some examples. whether it's food security, whether it's changing global environment and how that's affecting farming. It has to do with the way we think about water resources around the world and areas that are becoming more arid. In some ways, unless you have technological insights that help you do farming better, to do it more effectively with less water, more caloric output, you're not going to be able to deal with that. When I look at energy needs around the world, whether you're into quantum computing or Bitcoin, it doesn't really matter. We have this voracious appetite for new energy. We're going to need something like fusion. We're going to need much better ways to store energy in batteries so we can use less polluting vehicles and use them in other applications. But it really, in everything, I can't see a lot of things that don't require some technological breakthrough. So therefore, I think that institutions like the Weizmann Institute and sister institutions that are just devoted to discovery, just for the sake of discovery and betterment of humanity, there is no dollar goal at the end of this. Yes, have we made proceeds and have an endowment based upon the intellectual property of our blockbuster drugs? Of course, but the purpose of all this is to cure disease, to learn more about cancer, to learn more about how we treat disease. And so in that way, I think you'll see more institutions like ours taking shape around the world. And in some ways, I feel like philanthropy, governments even, need to safeguard this precious resource of institutions like Weizmann and institutions that are just dedicated to this, because we're constantly being threatened by not just Iranian missiles, but by cuts to research funding or organizations that think, we don't really have to be curiosity driven. We just want to cure this drug and monetize it. And it's a constant battle to be somewhere in the middle of that space. I like to tell people the smartest people in the world just want the freedom to run and do their thing. That's really what they love about it.
I really wish every young consultant that makes financial decisions for these gigantic corporations would be forced to take a macroeconomics course and a few, biological research courses before they start cutting funding to different things. Because you have 23-year-old analysts coming in for the top consulting firms and making these decisions, and they don't even understand how the world works yet. And then 20 years later, when one of their parents or grandparents is dying of something that could have been easily avoided, they're like, why did I make that budget cut when I was 23?
Yes. I think it's important for people to realize that 99% of the pipeline for future FDA-approved products actually are generated by places like Weizmann and other scientific institutions and universities. They're not coming from the pharma companies themselves nowadays.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we know that Weizmann was directly targeted in the recent missile attacks. Can you describe the extent of the physical and scientific damage? I have friends who personally invest, from the Guggenheim and Sats family, who personally invest in bio and medical research, and they were devastated, saying that decades of research and data was lost. Can you just dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, it's first let me say that even though it's a tragedy for science and it's going to affect many lives, not just our scientists, but also the patients that could have been treated by their discoveries.
Yes.
We were actually very fortunate in that, because the rockets hit at about 3 a.m. in the morning, and they only hit where the scientific buildings were clustered and not where our faculty and their families were, no one was injured or hurt. And so we have to all feel very fortunate about that. But 2 rockets did have direct hits on 2 major buildings. One was the Ullman Building of Life Sciences, which is the home of the Ross Integrated Cancer Center. That building was basically completely wiped out and will have to be either rebuilt entirely or reimagined somehow. The other direct hit was on a building that we've been working on for 5 years. It's a Center for Advanced Intelligent Materials, essentially a chemistry building. And that was set to open this November. Again, the damage was catastrophic. It will take us 3 to 5 years to renovate that building. And luckily, though, because that second building had not yet opened, there were no labs. So there was no science that was actually lost. In addition to those 2 buildings, the blast radius from each warhead was about 1,000 pounds of TNT. really did extensive damage to 3 surrounding buildings in environmental science, in mathematics, and some other domains. And then it did extensive damage to another 50 to 100 other structures, including people's homes, glass being blown out, HVAC systems going down, our preclinical facility where we take care of, it's a vivarium for animals. We had to, in the middle of the night, figure out how to get the ventilation going and air conditioning going, because we have the largest mouse community in Israel that we're aware of. So we have to get that up and running. Many other things. We also this was kind of amazing, because science is not just losing your lab. It's also losing the ability to use the cell lines and cell cultures that you've developed over 10 or 15 years, the animal models that you've designed. And so we actually had scientists running into these labs while they were still burning to try to get their ultra low temperature samples. And by noon the next day, this is the solidarity of the Israeli scientific community. Every ultra low temperature freezer that was available in the country was connected right by our campus, so they could put their samples in and save some of them. But it was,
amazing.
Again, it was quite devastating. This is going to be a 5-year process, at least, of rebuilding. More than 50 labs were impacted. You've got 40 research groups that are displaced. Remember, most of our postdocs and many of our PhDs are international students. So more than 400 of them and their families have been displaced and have had to require temporary housing. During the summer, we have an International Summer Science Institute for young scientists, just to begin working with our research groups. That got canceled. And we're going to have to both temporarily find homes for our scientists and make sure that they keep the research going on, the research groups together. But in the intermediate to long term, we actually have to rebuild, and that's going to be an extensive effort. We are estimating that it will cost between $400 and $500 million US for the rebuilding of all the facilities, the instrumentation that was hit, plus some of the bridging costs for the labs. The Israeli government, we're estimating, will cover about a third. If people ask, is there insurance on something like this? And the answer is no. The insurer is the state, is the state, and the state decides what it's worth. I'm already hearing stories from our academic leadership that they're talking with tax authorities, and they're telling them that microscope that you bought 5 years ago for $1 million was only worth $200,000. So we only want to give you replacement value. And the scientists and the leadership say, but we have to buy a new one that costs $1.3 billion now. So it doesn't really wash. So we're going to see how that plays out. But as you can imagine, Eddie, what we're spending a lot of our time on right now is reaching out not only to our best friends, our board members, and our donors that have allowed us to attain all of the accolades and heights and discoveries we had at this point, but also reach a whole new generation, a whole new group who want to take the Israel's crown jewel of science. In fact, I would say one of the global leaders in scientific research and impact, and help us rebuild back better. Do something spectacular to make sure that what we've had for the last 90 years we'll have for the next 90 years. And so this is an opportunity, spending most of my mornings, afternoons, and evenings with our leadership, talking with major foundations and philanthropists about getting involved. So that's where a lot of our rebuilding efforts are focused on today.
What I think is interesting is everyone looks, not everyone, but a lot of people, when they get to their 50s, 60s, 70s, they're looking to put their name onto a crown jewel in the arts, the sciences, to immortalize their family and their legacy in some way, shape, or form. Like if you see the trophy right there in the background, that's when my grandfather was an international director. He convinced, many decades ago, he convinced all these philanthropic organizations to work together to eradicate polio.
That's so amazing. What a great story.
Yeah, so I get to, every time someone's talking about eradicating polio or their polio campaigns, I get to say how my grandfather played a role in that. But what you have with the Weizmann Institute is so much more than just a trophy that's in my office. They have an opportunity right now, a once in a lifetime opportunity, to be able to not only help to rebuild. I wouldn't say it's a crown jewel of Israel. I would say it's a crown jewel of the international science community, and to immortalize their name, their family's legacy, by donating and being able to put their name on either a laboratory or a wing or a building, right?
Absolutely. The reality is we have so many naming opportunities depending upon someone's interest. It's all very bespoke. We have at least 5 buildings that have to be rebuilt or renovated. We have countless labs. We have huge amounts of instrumentation. We have naming of actual, professors and scientists. So that I would say that there's almost infinite variety to fit with each individual philanthropist. I'll just elaborate on one thing that you said, though. It's not very often that you have an inflection point for one of these world-class institutions that has such an amazing track record, that has just really been, taken a stomach punch from the Iranians. And again, I point out that we were targeted. We know that for a fact.
Which makes me sick. That just makes me sick. Like,
and
you're not messing with Israel. You're messing with the world. Do you know how many people have lost a family member to cancer? And they didn't just attack a country. They attacked science as a whole. There are hundreds, if not millions of people who are going to die of cancers that could have been cured because the cure was in that lab that was destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. It's very telling to me that when they did target us, just to let your listeners know, we just do basic science. Our scientific endeavors is freedom to do science for the benefit of humanity. 60% of what we do is life science. The majority of that is in cancer research. We also do things like neurodegeneration. We obviously do things in immunology like MS and other conditions. Do a lot in psychiatry. But my point is we're not aligned with any military. Well, we don't do any secret research on campus. What we are is what happened. They blew up in response to what was happening with the state. They blew up a cancer center, biology labs, and what was going to be chemistry labs, all devoted for science for the benefit of the future. But I guess I think that there's a calling, or there's a call right now for those folks who want to believe that civilization is about the Enlightenment values. It's about creating a better future for our kids, about investing in those people who just want to elevate the way that we live so we live longer and better and more thriving lives. This is an opportunity to come together as a community. And the truth is at Weizmann, this is not a startup. We've been doing this very, very well for, since 1934. So this is just an opportunity to come in and show that this generation has the same faith, both in the scientific strategy, the scientists who are there, our track record, to ensure that we get to do this well into the future. Because who knows, maybe the next cancer discovery, the next blockbuster is just around the corner. I'm concerned that if a lab, is offline for 3 months, 4 months, that's just delaying everything. Everything that's really going to matter to folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you recently launched this 2.25 billion global campaign called Empower Tomorrow, shortly before the attacks. Wow. Can you share how this campaign will accelerate research, drive medical breakthroughs, redefine donor impact, and how is that campaign shifted now that you're also having to rebuild what was lost?
The last question is a great question. It makes me feel like you have a lot of experience in philanthropy and fundraising. But just to let everybody know, typically in North America, the United States in particular, when you do fundraising in higher education or hospitals, you do a campaign, which is a limited duration of time that you choose that you want to raise a certain amount of money, but you identify what are those areas. It could be new buildings, it could be new investments in science, it could be new scholarships for students. Weizmann essentially decided to do this for the first time in our history about 5 years ago. And you go from a private phase, and that's private or silent phases when you're talking to your best friend and you're trying to get as much money as possible to go public. We just went public last month in Chicago, and I'm happy to admit that we are over 50% of our $2.25 billion goal, which is all about investing in our people and all investing in our science. It is the largest fundraising endeavor in the history of the state of Israel. Okay. And I like to say that's especially interesting because we're the smallest institution in the country. So it's fun to be both small and mighty. In terms of your question, though, as much as we feel incredibly thankful for the donors and the board members who have given so generously to get us beyond 50% of our goal, we also know that there's a new circumstance, which is the recovery efforts. And so the recovery efforts are now becoming a very important part of our campaign, a focus of our campaign. If you go to our website, which is www.acwis.org, ACWIS is the American Committee for the Weizmann Institute of Science, you'll see that the landing page right there is a recovery effort where people can get involved if they want to. For philanthropists who want to have a more detailed conversation, I am more than happy to make myself available. My address is just ceo@acwis.org. But again, we've seen a huge outpouring of, I would say, of people who feel shaken by this, who want to give back, who want to invest. I can tell you that the number of donors that we've seen is something that we track has really increased mightily since June 15th and the attacks.
Yeah.
But I think that we're talking about not insignificant amounts of money, $400 to $500 million. Assume the government covers a third, so we're in for this for at least $350. That means over the next 5 years, if we were expecting to raise $250 million a year, we're closer to 320. This is globally that I'm talking about. And the American Committee, we figure that we're going to have to raise an extra year of fundraising over the next 5 years just to pull our weight for the Institute. And we exist just to philanthropically support them. That's really our purpose.
And I mean, if we overshoot the mark, it's not like you don't know where to put that money. There's always other bigger, greater, more expensive ventures that the Weizmann Institute scientists can be pursuing.
Absolutely. I like to say that we do the two most economically nonsensible or the worst models are if you're in education or you're in very expensive scientific research. The economics of both of which are terrible. We happen to be in both. We educate students and we do cutting edge basic science. But to do basic science, that building that was about to open, that was being constructed for 5 years, the Deloro building, that was at least $150 million. And that wasn't even with everybody moved in. So assume that with their custom instrumentation and other things they're going to need, that could very easily get close to $250. We have two major buildings like that. We have 3 minor buildings, and then there's just all kinds of capacities that we've lost other places. One of the key things why money is so important now, like having cash reserves now is important, is if you look at the way all of this works, it's actually a delicate equilibrium. You need an amazing scientist who then has a lab that has the best instrumentation. They then have to recruit masters, PhDs, and postdocs to some of them to get their degrees or build their careers. If those labs are destroyed and they lose their instrumentation and they lose their science for 3, 6, 12 months, they might lose that scientist. They might just leave and say, I have to go to Boston or San Diego or Europe. And so what we're worried about is just brain drain, losing amazing people simply because they don't have facilities there. And so we're working around the clock to make sure that doesn't happen.
Which is absolutely amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I can't tell you how many times I've had an opportunity. Most of the audience knows I've broken multiple records around the world in marketing, software, this show. My book hit #2 bestseller 20 days after it launched, which they told me would not be possible. And every time I've looked for mentors who move the obstacles out of the way. And if there's obstacles in the way that are going to prevent me from hitting and breaking a record or missing a goal, I go to a different mentor immediately. I'm not wasting time. And you already communicated that you literally pick out people who have the similar brain, like where they're on a moving train. That train is moving. So they're either going to find a track that gets them where they want to go, or they're going to shift to a different track, but they're not going to miss their goal. So yeah, timing really is just so critical with retaining your top talent so that they can continue to create more and more blockbuster drugs.
Precisely.
So what are the cornerstone innovations that this new medical campus will enable? You kind of already brushed upon this, how donor support is going to directly accelerate scientific progress, not only in health, but also in cancer. And longevity is a really hot topic right now. You didn't dive into that one enough. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'd love to. We actually have a longevity center on our campus.
No
Of course
way.
we do. Of
Oh
course,
my
of course we do.
God.
So we can bring out those scientists anytime. We can talk about the rapamycin and all the other stuff that they're experimenting with. But generally, we're building for the first time. Like I said before, we've always been a research institute, scientists with grad students. We also, just as an aside, we have something called the Davidson Institute, which is really about educating primary school all the way up to high school students in the sciences. And that's about just creating a scientifically literate society, helping create a pipeline of future scientists to recruit, as well as just, it's good just to have people who appreciate and like science. And so we do that nationally across the country. What we learned is that in Israel, compared to the rest of the Western world, the number of physicians per population was one of the lowest. And over 50% of Israeli medical students were leaving Israel to get their MDs. And so there was a national effort to build more capability throughout the country to produce more scientists, more physicians. While that happened, we wanted to produce, yes, more physicians, but we didn't want to lose those people to science. And so we created a novel program. We were generously funded by an Israeli philanthropist for our first 10 years. And that program will need additional resources, but at least it got it off the ground and focused. And that is aimed at having an MD PhD program in which scientists are selected. It's all free of charge. At Weizmann, no one pays any tuition at any level, and we give everybody a stipend and a scholarship. So these students will come. They can do their PhD in quantum physics. They can do biology. They can do anything they want. And when they complete that, then they'll go to a medical school. They'll get their full MD program. We'll work with all of the important medical centers so they can get their clinical licensing and pick their specialties. But the idea is we want these people to be the translators between the best scientists in the world who are working on biomedicine and what's happening in the actual clinic. So our idea for these people to work in hospitals, but then spend like a day at Weizmann or something like that, working on science. And so that is going to start this fall. I'm happy to announce, with the attack, I haven't asked about the latest numbers, but I know that we had, for a very small number of spots, like in the tens for our inaugural class, when they opened up the portal for applications, we got something like 2,000 applications in the first week or two. So I think there's going to be a tremendous appetite for this program. I think they're going to be creating some of the best scientists and best physicians of the future. One other thing that we're doing is we're building a biomedical village. This was kind of the vision of our president before the missile strikes, is we want to create this beautiful integrated village where all of the clinical medicine and the faculty can be working alongside basic science. But the really fun model change for Weizmann is, most basic scientists, when you ask them how to define themselves, if they're in biology, it's by their animal model. I'm a fruit fly person. I'm a nematode person.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a mouse person. That's how they define themselves. What's cool at Weizmann is we want this to be the place, because of where we are with modern technology, clinical medicine. We think that this could be the place where you can really study humans in real time. And so you'll have the students studying to be medical doctors, but working with real life patients that are coming in. And so that's kind of our vision, is you can basically be teaching them what to do, but also studying. Instead of going through all of these elaborate models, go directly into humans when you know it's not toxic and safe, and see what you can do with that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I remember when I was getting my degree, I was very blessed as an American Jew to know a lot of doctors. Like in the US, it's like, are you going to go into real estate, be a lawyer, or a doctor? And a lot of my friends who didn't have this elaborate connection of doctors. They were just having to study theory when we were in our undergrad, whereas I got to shadow doctors in and out throughout their day. And then I got to go to Haiti, where they have no doctors, and they decided that I was a doctor because I knew more than their actual doctors. And I was like, no, I'm really not a doctor. This is not funny. And then they had me teaching their actual doctors everything I had learned in my first 3 years of biochemistry undergrad. So
That's interesting.
Oh yeah, that traumatized me.
There's one unique thing. You know, Weitzman has to put a Weitzman twist on everything. I think it's just in their DNA. And
Yeah,
so for their medical school, you know, typically you get your medical degree, and then most people would get a PhD in some medically related field to become an MD PhD. That's the typical course in the US. So we've reversed it. And the other part that's so they get their PhD in anything they want first. They could be a computer scientist who becomes an oncologist. That's the way it could work. But even
yeah,
the way that they're going to study medicine, we visited Harvard Medical School, NYU, uh, Washington University in St. Louis, and others to kind of say, how would we want to teach medical students that are super, super smart? And so they got rid of the lecture hall. They're going to get people in smaller rooms together, teaching each other with like a tutor, essentially the way that they want to do it. So even that has its own little twists. Like it's not going to be, frankly, when my friends were in first year of medical school, I think they did their entire education on Zoom. So it's, you know, or just recordings. So it's
yeah.
going to be very different than that. Very different than lecture learning and recordings.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I love getting to hear things like this in contradiction to people saying that the medical system is broken, it's terrible. Once you get sick, you're screwed. You fall through the system. So it's very encouraging to hear how the system isn't broken. It's just being refined, where we will see the ripple effects of it within the next few years.
Yeah, I think that my sense is I know that you can listen to Peter Thiel and many people who are very pessimistic that they've been telling us that the cure for cancer is right around the corner and all this other stuff. But I tell you that just between the advances in like functional MRI machines and what physics has brought to biology and chemistry, we should be seeing a lot of really interesting discoveries at a pace we haven't seen before. And then just the ability to take the amazing amounts of data that are created by microscopes and telescopes, and then wed it to AI, which has this infinite patience just to review data, means you're gonna have a higher hit rate of gleaning correlation and causation from the data sets that you already have. I think it's going to be a renaissance. I mean, I don't really know any scientist at Weizmann that isn't hyper optimistic about where we are in the age of science, even though they might be lamenting that their lab was blown up. But when it comes to science, they're bullish.
Yeah, yeah. I have friends who are not in the medical space at all, and they're like, oh, AI is going to destroy the world. It's like AI has so much room left in the medical applications until you see people living to the age of 500 and looking like they're 30 years old. Like, we have not even begun to scratch the surface on what medicine and AI can do together.
It's amazing. It's true.
Okay, so two final questions, and we kind of already answered one of these. Why is now the most important moment in the almost 90-year history? Yeah, 90 years. For philanthropists to step forward with Weizmann?
You know, you're an expert in marketing. I am not, but I've always, you know, when I've talked with philanthropists and I ask them what is like one of their favorite lines in all of marketing, and they always go to Patek Philippe, the complicated Swiss watch company, and they have that famous quote that they really haven't tweaked that much, which is, "You never actually own a Patek Philippe; you merely look after it for the next generation." And I think that when it comes to the Weizmann Institute, you're really looking at the Patek Philippe, the crown jewel of Israeli science and global science, that does things so uniquely and is so special. And I don't think we all have to appreciate how rare these institutions and people are, that this is a moment for a philanthropist of vision with character who has the means to partner with us and our faculty and our leadership to put our foot in the stand and say, we are not going to let forces of regressive barbarism get in the way of human progress and what we can contribute. And so that's what I would say.
I love that. I absolutely love that. My family's been investing in real estate for 5 generations. And at the age of 8, you start attending meetings.
Wow.
Because you're learning. Yeah, at the age of 8, you're learning. You get our family uniform is a blue blazer with gold buttons. So when you turn 8, you get your little blue blazer, and then you get to start coming to board meetings, because your career isn't about you. It's about prepping the next generation to continue to use commercial real estate development for economic empowerment and for good.
Yeah, if the root of philanthropy is philo in Greek, which is love of, and anthropos, which is man, what greater gift to mankind could you give than investing in the future of humanity? That's really what we're about in every way. And so I think it's an opportunity for one or more philanthropists to really make an impact of lasting significance.
Just making a note for another person I have to introduce you to. Okay. So for those listening who want to be part of something meaningful, what are the ways that they can engage? They're going to email you directly. I'm going to just say right now that if we put your private email on there, you might get bombarded. So do you have a team of assistants that they could contact?
We will. We if they send it to the CEO, I have a team that can help me triage that.
Okay.
We read everything. I promise everybody we read and respond to everything.
Okay.
But it's not just me.
Okay. Yeah. That's why I was flinching earlier when you were like, I'll give them my personal email. I was like, oh boy. Okay. So you do have a team that's helping to filter that inbox. I have the same. I have 5 people filtering.
We're on social media. We have a website, like I mentioned before. Please go on to it, link our story to it. We've been all over the news. So you go to Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, obviously all the Israeli newspapers, many of the scientific press like Nature have written about us. One thing I can leave you with, it's such a powerful image for me, is that actually one of the leaders of our MD PhD program and his partner just published in Nature an article that suggests that they can look for blood cancers, in particular leukemia, without having to go into your bone marrow, just by a simple blood test. They published this in one of the most prestigious magazines in all of science, and both of them just had their labs blown up 2 weeks ago. And so this goes to show you kind of what we're dealing with here and the ramifications of it. But look, we're a resilient group. We're not going anywhere. I think we're more committed than ever to carrying the torch that Chaim Weizmann lit all those years ago, and continue to help people.
Yeah, I know some friends who lost siblings when we were young from leukemia. So knowing that this attack on the 15th just reversed all that progress is really, it's heartbreaking.
Hopefully not all of it. I mean, the sad thing is I think whatever was in the cloud on computers is safe. I just think that a lot of the cell lines, the samples that they had, we're still inventorying what we have left. And that's what I'm worried about is some of these, there's stories of, I saw in the Hebrew press, there's a woman whose friend who passed of cancer gave her his cells to study. Those are irretrievably lost now.
Oh my God.
So stories like that are just heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all of this.
My pleasure.
Giving us hope about the future of humanity and medicine, and letting our audience have a unique opportunity to immortalize their own family legacies through this unfortunate, it is what it is. The only thing we can do now is rebuild and support and make sure that we get back on track with getting all these medical developments back to bringing us to a better future.
Eddie, thank you for having me.
Take care, guys. I will see you back online next time. Thank you so much for tuning in.